Alright, let's talk about India. A nation of incredible diversity, amazing food, and booming economic growth. Yes, India's gross domestic product, or GDP, has been on a tear. Fastest growing major economy, they shout from the rooftops. You'd think everyone there is swimming in rupees, right? Living their best lives, but then... Hold on a second, you look at another report. This one's called the World Happiness Report. And where does India often find itself on that list? Well, let's just say it's not exactly challenging the Nordic countries for the top spot. So, what gives? We have this massive economy, yet the actual happiness levels? Not quite matching up. Is GDP really the best way to tell if a country is doing well? So, what exactly is this GDP thing everyone keeps banging on about? Gross domestic product. It's the total monetary value of all the finished goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific time period. Think of it as the country's total sales receipt for the year. Every car made, every app downloaded, every cup of coffee sold. It all adds up. It's a big, big number. Now, why was it invented? After the Great Depression and during World War II, economists wanted a way to measure a nation's productive capacity. How much stuff could a country make? How much economic activity was happening? But here's where it all goes a bit pear-shaped. GDP is fundamentally flawed if you're trying to use it as a measure of actual human well-being or national prosperity. For instance, GDP goes up when there's a disaster. A massive hurricane devastates a region. The rebuilding efforts, the construction, the medical bills, all that spending makes GDP go up. GDP doesn't care if the spending is on something good like education or something bad like cleaning up an oil spill. It just counts the money changing hands. It's a measure of quantity, not quality. Now you might be thinking, okay John, GDP counts some weird stuff, but surely more money generally means more happiness, right? Having enough money to meet your basic needs, food, shelter, healthcare, absolutely contributes to well-being. But once those basic needs are met, the relationship between more money and more happiness gets a lot murkier. And there's a fancy term for this, the Easterlin paradox. Within a country, richer people tend to be happier than poorer people. But when you compare countries, or look at a single country over a long period of time as it gets richer, average happiness levels don't necessarily increase much, if at all, once a certain level of wealth is reached. The United States, for example, its GDP per capita has risen dramatically over the past several decades. But are they happier? Survey data on life satisfaction and happiness has shown very little upward trend, and in some cases, even a slight decline. More stuff, bigger houses, fancier cars, but not necessarily more joy. This isn't just an American phenomenon. You see similar patterns in other developed nations. It suggests that while economic growth is important up to a point, beyond that, other factors start playing a much bigger role in our overall well-being. So, if GDP is a bit of a blunt instrument, what are the alternatives? One of the most famous alternatives comes from Bhutan. They champion something called Gross National Happiness, or GNH. GNH isn't just some fluffy, feel-good slogan. It's a serious attempt to define and measure prosperity in a more holistic way. The philosophy behind GNH is that sustainable development should take a holistic approach and give equal importance to non-economic aspects of well-being. GNH is based on 4 main pillars: good governance, sustainable socio-economic development, preservation and promotion of culture, and environmental conservation. Bhutan actually uses GNH to guide its policymaking. Bhutan's GNH is inspiring, but it's not the only alternative out there. One of the most well-known is the Human Development Index, or HDI. This was developed by the United Nations Development Program, the UNDP, and it's been around since 1990. The HDI tries to give a more rounded picture of human progress than just economic output. The HDI focuses on 3 key dimensions of human development: a long and healthy life, being knowledgeable, and having a decent standard of living. Then there's another interesting one called the Genuine Progress Indicator, or GPI. The GPI starts with the same personal consumption data that GDP uses, but then it makes a whole bunch of adjustments. It adds things that GDP ignores but that clearly contribute to well-being, like the value of household work, volunteer work, and higher education. And crucially, it subtracts things that GDP counts as positive but are actually negative for our well-being. Things like the costs of crime, the costs of pollution, the depletion of natural resources, the costs of car accidents, and income inequality. GPI tries to give a more honest accounting of whether we're genuinely making progress or just running faster on a treadmill that's actually taking us backward. It's a step in the right direction, acknowledging that being rich isn't much fun if you're also sick and uneducated. Let's look at some real-world examples of how this focus on GDP versus broader well-being plays out. Take Costa Rica. This small Central American nation consistently punches above its weight in happiness rankings and on indices like the Happy Planet Index. It has a relatively modest GDP per capita compared to, say, economic powerhouses. Yet its people report high levels of life satisfaction. What's their secret? They abolished their army back in 1949 and redirected that funding towards education, healthcare, and environmental protection. Costa Rica has made incredible strides in reforestation, and a significant portion of its energy comes from renewable sources. They've prioritized universal healthcare and education, leading to high literacy rates and life expectancy, comparable to much wealthier nations. Now let's contrast that with a place like Singapore. Singapore is an undeniable economic miracle. It transformed itself from a developing nation into a global financial hub with a very high GDP per capita. However, Singapore often ranks lower than you might expect on happiness indices, especially considering its wealth. There are discussions about high-pressure work environments, intense academic competition, and a high cost of living that can create stress despite the material affluence. It shows that a high GDP doesn't necessarily equate to a relaxed, stress-free, or universally joyful existence. Let's hop over to another part of the world, the Nordic countries. Finland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, these nations consistently top the World Happiness Report. And yes, they are wealthy countries with high GDP per capita. But their success story isn't just about money. It's about how they use that money and structure their societies. They have strong social safety nets, universal healthcare, excellent public education, generous parental leave, and a strong emphasis on work-life balance. They invest heavily in their people. These countries generally have high levels of social trust, low corruption, and a strong sense of community. Their model suggests that prosperity is about much more than just individual wealth accumulation. It's about collective well-being. Now, let's turn to China. China's economic transformation over the past few decades has been absolutely staggering. However, this rapid growth has come with significant challenges, including environmental degradation, rising income inequality, and intense work pressure. It's another example of the growth paradox: incredible economic expansion, but with complex and sometimes detrimental impacts on other aspects of life and well-being. Let's bring it back to India, where we started. As we said, the GDP numbers look impressive, but when you peek behind the curtain, the picture gets a lot more complicated. One of the biggest issues is inequality. Yes, the economy is growing, but who is benefiting the most? Wealth concentration in India is a serious concern, with a significant portion of the economic gains going to a relatively small percentage of the population. Then, there are the environmental costs. Rapid industrialization and urbanization, while contributing to GDP, have often come at a steep price for the environment. Air pollution in major Indian cities is among the worst in the world, leading to severe health problems. And what about essential public services? While India has made progress, there are still significant gaps in access to quality healthcare and education for large swaths of its population. For India, the challenge is immense. It's not about stopping economic growth, but about making that growth more inclusive, more sustainable, and more focused on improving the actual lives of its billion-plus citizens. It's about ensuring that development translates into tangible benefits for everyone, not just a select few. So, after all this, it's pretty clear, isn't it? Relying solely on GDP to measure a nation's success is like trying to understand a person by only looking at their bank balance. It tells you something, sure, but it misses so much. It ignores the quality of our air and water, the strength of our communities, our health, our education, our sense of security, our happiness. It counts bombs and prisons as economic positives but assigns no value to parenting or volunteering. We need to move towards more holistic measures of progress. Measures that capture the true well-being of people and the planet. Things like the Human Development Index, the Genuine Progress Indicator, and the principles behind gross national happiness offer valuable starting points. They encourage us to think more broadly about what constitutes a good life and a successful society. It's about creating economies that serve humanity, not the other way around. Ultimately, the goal should be to build societies where people can lead healthy, fulfilling, and meaningful lives. Where progress is measured not just by the quantity of stuff we produce, but by the quality of the lives we lead. It's time to demand a better scorecard for prosperity, one that truly reflects whether we are, as a whole, genuinely better off.